1803 hours, September 9th, 2549. Military calendar. Procyon system. Arcadia. Fireteam Ares, Marcos called over comm. Fall back. I repeat, fall back. Gunfire filled the comm as Kyra began to object.
We got survivors here.
Evac Pelicans are en route, Jay added.
We have hostile armor inbound.
Hamish reported.
What, are we just going to leave the survivors to die?
Kyra hopelessly demanded. Jay and Marcos fired quick bursts into several grunts who were approaching their covered position near the wreckage of a car. One of the grunts' methane tanks exploded and killed the other grunts around him. The settlement of Abascan was the only human population centre on the planet since the first Battle of Arcadia back in 2531. And now, it was under siege once more. A group of settlers trying desperately to keep away from the Covenant forces appeared from a street corner and ran towards Marcos and Jay. "Drop, now!" Marcos shouted. The settlers dropped to the floor without hesitation. Marcos and Jay quickly dispatched 3 jackals with carbines, who quickly followed them around the corner. "Clear," Marcos shouted. The settlers quickly stood back up and ran past Marcos and Jay, some giving terrified but thankful nods, others just staring at them as they realised just how massive the 2 troopers were. "We're not abandoning them. The Marines can handle it," Jay answered.
Marines at my location are down. I've got 15 active IFFs. Do you think they can hold up against hostile armor? They're not equipped for it.
Kyra objected. "I said fall back. That's an order," Marcos demanded, forcing forward his authority through rank.
"Sir, yes sir,"
Kyra reluctantly answered. Jay knelt and fired around his cover at 2 more jackals. Marcos stood behind him, firing as well. They aimed for the notch in the energy shields where they could fire their plasma pistols. Their shots made the jackals stumble and pull their shields back, revealing their weak bird-like forms. They pumped rounds into the jackals' torsos, and they fell to the floor. "Dropping nav marker on RV point now. Do not engage hostile forces unless necessary, understood?" Marcos ordered. "Yes sir," Fireteam Ares responded. Marcos slapped Jay on the shoulder. They both stood and ran for the RV point half a click away from the main assault. Fireteam Ares had transferred to only Section 3 4 years ago. Following their augmentations and after a short recovery and training to acclimate to the physiological changes, they were deployed. They had been in multiple engagements and proved the first augmentations adapted for fully grown adults were effective, paving the way for further development and for Oni to reach out to additional specialists to help continue this work. This was the first engagement, however, that they were trying out a new type of armour system. Their new armour systems were relatively form-fitting. The matte black ultra-light alloy was remarkably strong, and the mobility that it gave was surprising given how closely it fit the body. It was composed of a skin-tight fabric membrane to be put on first, then a layer of diamond Kevlar weave on top of that, then 5mm of matte black titanium nano composite alloy armour on top of that, all over the body with slight gaps between each plate giving flexibility. The helmet was very reminiscent of the standard ODST helmet. The main feature of this armour, however, was hidden inside the armoured casing of the backpack, and directly integrated into the armour itself. At various points on the armour, small lights could be seen. These lights were actually small-scale energy projectors. The armour had a very early-phase experimental energy shield. Oni had developed an energy shield generator device they called the Bubble Shield. This new prototype armour used a miniaturized version of the projectors to generate an energy shield around the suit. The energy shield would allow people and slow-moving objects to pass through the shield, but would stop ballistic and energy-based projectiles. Although it wasn't perfect and didn't fit to the physical shape of the suit, instead projecting a bubble of interconnected hexagonal energy barriers around the suit. It could still be overloaded and fail and would take time to recharge. It was very energy hungry, so it was necessary to outfit the armour with a low-profile power pack in the integrated backpack unit, and was only designed to give up to 48 hours of power to the shield systems and HUD systems in the helmet, after which power would run out and the user would be left with a light armour system capable of protecting them for a short time. The armour was half the weight of standard ODST battle armour, and provided nearly as much protection without the shielding system. Once the shielding was active, however, it provided more than enough protection to see them through a multitude of engagements. Marcos and Jay were still running towards the RV point. Marcos made note that he and Ares had been operating on Arcadia more or less continually for 40 hours, and that drew his attention to the energy levels of his suit, and was alarmed to see his HUD tell him he only had a couple of hours of power left at best. He had noticed that the more punishment the shields took and the more they had to recharge, the faster the suit's energy levels would drain, so it made sense to continue to avoid getting hit where possible. An explosion shook the area as a plasma mortar round from a Wraith smashed into a building ahead of Jay and Marcos. Huge chunks of rubble and twisted metal fell into their path and tumbled through the air. Marcos and Jay, running at a top speed of 50 km per hour, jumped inhuman heights into the air, twisting their bodies as they went, avoiding the rubble and falling metalwork. They landed solidly on the ground and kept running without missing a stride. They ran across a large courtyard area, quickly seeking cover where they could. There were a few settlers lying dead around the courtyard. A brute wielding a spike rifle had evidently been the perpetrator. It had shot one unfortunate soul. The 12-inch stake-like metal projectiles had practically nailed the person to the wall, their body hanging limp, held up only by the 12-inch spikes. They kept moving out of the courtyard area and began running up a dirt roadway bordered by rows of buildings. Another roadway connected the main one to the right in a T-junction. Marcos kept scanning the area for threats. Jay turned his attention to the adjoining roadway looking for threats. He took a brief but open opportunity to take down a small pack of grunts. Half a dozen less of the bastards to deal with, he thought to himself. With the area clear, they continued to run as their nav marker counted down the distance. The buildings either side of the roadway stopped, and just further on was the edge of the jungle and their RV point. The nav marker on their heads-up displays winked down to 0.0 meters. They held near the edge of the jungle, found limited cover near some large granite boulders protruding from the ground, just in case there were enemy snipers nearby, and waited for the others to arrive. Marcos checked his ammo on his BR-55 battle rifle, ejected the spent magazine and slid a new one home, and cycled around into the chamber. Jay lifted his battle rifle over his shoulder and slid it down his back. A magnetic plate in the armour there locked the battle rifle in place. Marcos unpolarized his visor. The reflective silver-blue visor went transparent. Marcos's face was chiseled from stone and he looked set and focused in his combat mindset. Jay kept his visor polarized. He had a feeling his grim expression would concern Marcos, so he kept it hidden. Marcos watched his HUD as the IFFs of the other members of Ares moved. Hamish ran into view and headed towards Marcos and Jay. Hamish then lifted his sniper rifle, levelled it at Marcos and Jay, and pulled the trigger. The round shot over Marcos and Jay's head, and the limp body of a jackal sniper fell to the floor from one of the trees. Hamish nodded a hello to Marcos and Jay, rested his rifle on the granite boulders, and sighted back the way he had came, giving cover fire for Kyra as she approached. She came into view and ran towards them. A car tumbled out of the adjoining road, hit the floor just next to Kyra, picking up off the floor and gliding over her. Kyra ducked just in time. The car tumbled and smashed into a building and was shortly followed by two large streams of green plasma energy. Marcos felt his chest tighten. "Hunters," Kyra shouted, confirming Marcos' suspicion. "Let's get in there," Marcos shouted as he repolarized his helmet and ran towards the hunters. The hulking bipedal creatures stood 12 feet tall, although when in their combat stance they contracted into their armour to around 9 feet, displaying a back of armoured razor-sharp spikes that could easily impale an adversary who got too close. They wielded a massive plasma cannon and equally huge impenetrable shields that they used to devastating effect if enemies got too close. Their cobalt-coloured armour was impossibly strong, and the only effective way to take them down was to fire in the gaps in their armour, around the area that could be considered their stomach. The creatures were actually a colony of eel-type creatures called Legolo, which shared a hive-mind intelligence and consciousness. Once a colony of Legolo was housed in the form of the hunter armour, they were a deadly, formidable enemy, and worse still, they always came in pairs. The first hunter held position farther back and continued to fire its powerful plasma cannon. Kara dived to the left to avoid the incoming blast. She felt the heat but got clear in time. The second hunter kept charging, rolled its shoulder and swung its shield with devastating power. Kara quick-stepped left, cutting it very close to its massive form but avoiding the shield on its right arm. She took the opportunity to quickly prime a frag grenade and forced it into the gap in the hunter's armour. The grenade dislodged and fell, detonating on the floor just behind it. A few eels fell from the hunter's armour along with thick, viscous, luminescent orange blood. The hunter, however, was otherwise unaffected, pivoted on its heels and bore its massive shield in a low, wide sweep. Kyra pushed off from the ground as hard as she could and managed to jump clear of the swing. Marcos and Jay arrived to assist. Hamish was still back at his cover, sighting up with his sniper rifle, waiting for the open opportunity. Marcos and Jay opened up and drew its attention. The hunter turned towards them. With just a few strides it accelerated towards them, preparing to crush them into the floor. Its bond brother fired a stream from its plasma cannon. The hunter, charging, intercepted the plasma stream, splashed across the hunter's back, its armour heated to a cherry red, some parts melting and sagging under the heat. The hunter growled and collapsed to the ground in a thunderous heap. The remaining hunter, seeing its bond brother fall to the floor dead, fell into a blood rage. It bellowed a war cry, the air shook. The hunter fired stream after stream from its plasma cannon as it advanced on the comparatively tiny humans. Marcos quickly glanced to his left. Hamish was still in position. "Join up, concentrate our fire, see if we can turn it towards Hamish," Marcos ordered. Kyra moved in on Jay and Marcos, and together they kept the hunter's attention, ducking and diving out of the way to avoid the incoming streams of plasma. One cut too close, Jay's shields fell to half, and he felt the skin on his left arm blister. The team, minus Hamish, began strafing to the right, rotating the unaware hunter into the correct position. 4 loud cracks sounded out of the area. The hunter shuddered and took a step forward, momentarily off balance, its massive boot thudding to the ground, kicking up dirt. It span and focused on the origins of the shots, momentarily forgetting the 3 humans now stood at its back. Fireteam Ares opened up simultaneously, pumping the hunter's exposed weak spot full of bullets. Eels coiled and trembled, pints of orange blood leaked from the wounds. The hunter shuddered again and fell to the floor, lifeless. "Let's not stick around," Jay suggested. They quickly jogged back to Hamish's position, exchanging nods of thanks as Hamish reloaded his sniper rifle. Kyra slung her weapon and removed her helmet. "Hostile armor got there just as I was leaving. Heard a lot of screaming. I don't know if there are any survivors," Kyra said remorsefully. "Pelicans will search for friendly contacts and lay down some cover fire to get the survivors out of here. Once they're clear, Short Swords are cleared for a carpet bomb on the heavy armour. We did all we could. For now, we've got another job to do." Marcos started as he brought up the mission objectives on his HUD. "Our target is an Oni base on Bilsey's Plateau, bordering the jungle approximately 2 clicks southeast from here. There's not much left of it after the first battle in 31, but there's a chance there may still be computer systems there with information regarding locations of other UNSC colonies. Under Cole Protocol, we've been ordered to get in there and remove any and all information that may lead the Covenant to Earth." "Why not nuke the place?" Hamish asked. "We're still evacuating settlers. Can't plant a nuke while that's happening," Kyra answered. "There's Covenant forces already there. They're searching the place. The Oni base has a fail-safe system to destroy sensitive information in a non-nuclear way. Tactical EMP bursts." Jay smiled. "Isn't that going to have the same effect on the surrounding environment as a nuke would? Isn't it still going to make our birds fall out of the sky and fry any electronic systems in radius of the pulse?" Hamish spoke up. "The computer systems holding the information are in an underground section of the facility and are directly linked to the EMP systems. The Oni base is also EMP shielded. Admittedly, after the damage, it may not be 100%, but it's a damn sight better than a nuke, and the only option we've got. That's our objective. Get inside the facility, prime the EMP on countdown, and get out of there." "What about the evacuation?" Kyra asked. "Once the EMP is primed, all further evacuation attempts will be aborted," Jay answered. "Then what?" Hamish asked. "We get off of Arcadia," Marcos said grimly. "They're glassing it, aren't they?" Kyra sighed. "Let's move," Marcos said, avoiding having to answer the question. Fireteam Ares made their way through nearly 2 kilometers of thick foliage in less than 30 minutes. They held near the edge of the clearing and checked the area. "Order still stands. Do not engage unless completely necessary, understood?" Marcos ordered. Ares nodded a response. "No comms here on out. Hand signals only," Marcos spoke. He edged his way forward, checking the area was clear. Any Covenant that were reported to be here were no longer here, which meant one of 2 things. Either they'd gotten what they came for and left, or they were still inside the base, searching for what they wanted. In either case, it wasn't a good situation. Weapons at the ready, Ares darted across an open expanse of concrete until they were in the shadows of a large tower structure, partially damaged but still standing. Sections of its walls were missing, and the staircase and rooms were visible through the holes. They quickly navigated around its base, pausing briefly in the cover of a large satellite dish that had been hit by plasma fire and fallen from the top of that tower. They held to allow an elite and 5 grunts to amble by. They waited for an all clear once again and made their way to the doorway in the base of the tower. The doors had been wrenched apart. One was badly damaged and the other was barely holding onto its hinges. Fireteam Ares moved into the building, careful not to make any noise that might give away their presence. Inside was a room that had stairs and elevators leading up and down. Marcos brought up his mission objectives and opened up a subfolder that contained the schematics of the building. Their target was unfortunately at the bottom of this facility, nearly a kilometre down. He set a nav marker on it and closed the schematic. A small green arrow appeared on Fireteam Ares' HUD. Marcos signalled the elevator doors. Jay and Hamish quickly walked over and pried the doors apart. Marcos stepped up and examined the shaft. It was pitch black, so he activated his helmet lights. A small beam from his left cheek cut through the darkness. There were cables running down the centre, but he didn't want to chance anyone slipping. Even with their augmentations, a kilometre fall wouldn't be pretty. There was, however, maintenance ladders inset into the wall. Marcos cautiously stepped closer to the edge, and to the right of the doors grabbed one of the maintenance ladder's rungs and swung himself into the elevator shaft. He cut his helmet light and relied upon his visor's night vision to see where he was going. Quickly, Fireteam Ares joined him and they began their 1 kilometre climb down into the facility. Marcos let go and dropped the last few feet at the base of the elevator shaft. His arms burned, but he stayed focused. He waited for the others to get to the bottom as well, then signalled Jay and Kara to get the elevator doors. If it wasn't for their visor mode, they wouldn't have known there was even an elevator door there. Jay and Kyra stepped up and gripped the seam of the door and pulled it apart. The door slid apart with a gentle creak. They advanced into the room, scanning their weapons back and forth, searching for movement. Nothing. If anything, this unsettled Marcos. The Covenant that were reported to be at this base weren't there when they got there, and for the time being, he should assume they still are, in which case, they're in this underground facility with him somewhere, but they haven't reached the bottom yet, meaning there was potentially 1 kilometre of Covenant between him and sunlight. A worrying thought, to say the least. They moved to a doorway that was closest to their nav marker and continued to advance. The distance counter ticked over to 100 metres. They entered another door and found their way in a long corridor with a series of rooms branching off of it. The nav marker was directly on the door at the end of the corridor. They quickly but quietly moved to the door. Marcos held up a fist. Fireteam Ares stopped and fell to a crouch. Marcos stepped towards the door and listened. Nothing. He keyed the door open. The doors didn't respond. He pressed it again. They still didn't respond. Marcos signalled to Jay, then made a short punching motion. Jay slung his weapon and moved to the door. He examined the door keypad, and then put his fist through it. A shower of sparks sprayed from the open hole Jay had just created. He fiddled with a few of the wires, and the doors opened quickly. Fireteam Ares stood and moved through. Jay and Hamish remained near the door, sighted up the corridor, looking for inbound hostiles. Marcos and Kyra quickly got to work reactivating the systems required to prime the EMP. Kyra typed furiously at a console as she sent commands to cycle up the EMP systems. Marcos prepared the sequence to reactivate one of the reactors required to charge the EMP, but didn't actually send the command until it was needed. Once the reactor came online, the facility would suddenly have power back again. Elevators would start working, consoles would turn back on, and even radar dishes on towers would begin to rotate. It would be a massive beacon to all enemy forces in the area. Kyra signalled a good to go. Marcos opened a private narrowband comm to Kyra. See if you can keep the power just where it is needed. Try to bypass all peripheral systems. If we can minimise down on that, the Covenant might not even know we're here. Roger that, Kyra replied as she got to work. Marcos cut the comms and continued to confirm the connection between the data caches and the EMP system. He confirmed all systems that may contain information were functional, then readied failsafe directive. Kyra opened private comm to Marcos. Confirmed peripheral systems bypassed and reactor is ready to be cycled up. Marcos opened team comm. Cycle up in 3, 2, 1. Mark. Kyra sent the commands. Consoles all over the room started up and began flashing information on the screen. The lights flickered and went dark again. Reactor cycled up, EMP systems coming online. Kyra spoke. Marcos looked back to his console and narrated what he was doing. EMP failsafe active, primed and ready. Countdown to failsafe directive set to 5 minutes. Uploading timer to HUDs now. Charging EMP, currently 57% and climbing, Kyra reported. A timer winked on Fireteam Ares HUD and displayed 5 minutes. A nav marker then appeared showing their exit. EMP charge at 83%, Kyra updated. How's our exit? Marcos asked Hamish. All clear, Hamish reported. Jay, get that elevator down here on the double. Extraction, Marcos continued. I'm on it, Jay spoke. Problem with the reactor, Kyra called out. The bypass peripherals means it's overcharging. I'll raise its critical shutdown to 6 minutes. It should hold. How sure is should? Marcos asked. 60% sure. Elevator's on its way back down, Kyra said. Screw it, it'll have to do. Extraction, Marcos asked. Confirmed, evac Pelican en route. I've sent them the countdown. It will not stay here any more than 2 minutes to EMP activation though, Jay replied. Gives us 3 minutes to get the hell out of here. It's a little tight, but I think we can make it. Starting countdown. 3, 2, 1. Mark! Marcos had no sooner hit the button that he had spun on his heels, brought his weapon to bear and shouted, "Time to move, Ares!" Fireteam Ares sprinted up the corridor, covering the 100 metres in a little over 7 seconds. They ran to the elevator. The doors opened as they approached. 2 elites marched off the elevator, their massive 8'6" forms dominating the corridor. They wore blue armour and their 4 mandibles stretched into something that could be considered a wide grin. Fireteam Ares opened up. One of the elites levelled its plasma rifle and, before it had chance to fire, was put down. The second elite dropped its plasma rifle, battle-cried and ran at Jay. Jay slung his weapon, stepped towards the charging elite. It lunged for him. Jay stepped inside of its reach, grabbed its armour and swung it as hard as he could. The elite stumbled but regained its footing. Its huge hand was easily big enough to grab Jay by the head. Jay punched the elite in the mandibles. It shook off the blow and slammed Jay into the deck. Marcos stepped up and forced the barrel of his battle rifle into the elite's mouth. He squeezed the trigger. The elite stumbled backwards, bringing its hand up to its face. Fireteam Ares fired again as Jay got back to his feet. A few of the rounds penetrated the armour of the elite's chest. It choked and leaned forward, and Jay brought the butt of his rifle down onto the elite's elongated neck. Bones crunched and the elite fell forward. Jay pumped 3 rounds into the skull and gave it a violent kick. The elite didn't move. Let's get out of here right now, Marcos ordered as he noticed the timer was now 4:16. They boarded the elevator and selected top floor. The elevator ascended quickly, but by the time they reached the top floor, the counter was at 3:34.
Fireteam Ares, this is Pelican Tango 261. We have hostile forces topside. We're dusting off in approximately 30 seconds. Respond, over.
The voice of the pilot came over comm. Acknowledge Tango 261. We're inbound, estimated 20 seconds, Jay replied.
Confirmed. Fast as you can, Ares,
The pilot responded. Fireteam Ares ran full throttle out of the tower. Jay led the way across the only base to one of the many landing pads. Covenant forces were approaching the dropship, which was taking hits. The pilot was firing its nose-mounted cannon, but it wasn't helping much. Fireteam Ares continued in a full run towards the Pelican, firing as they went. Tango 261, lift off 10 feet and pop the hatch. Face it our way, Marcos ordered.
Roger that,
the pilot said as the Pelican lifted quickly off of the ground and rotated, exposing the rear hatch to the troop bay at the back. Covenant troops turned their attention to Fireteam Ares. Marcos felt rounds hitting his shield. His HUD showed his shields dropping quickly. Shields are down, Jay reported. Fireteam Ares changed their formation to protect Jay. They closed with the Covenant forces, firing as they went and punching a hole big enough for them to get through. The Pelican opened its rear hatch. Marcos felt his legs pounding the concrete. He pushed off hard and glided through the air. He lifted 10 feet off the ground and stepped seamlessly onto the rear hatch, stepping forward to allow the others room. The dozen or so evacuees looked on in awe at the 4 giants stepping suddenly into the Pelican and closed the hatch behind them. Fireteam Ares aboard, Marcos announced.
Roger that, let's get the hell out of here.
Anyone left behind? Marcos asked.
No one living. 19 birds made it out, around 200 survivors.
Marcos shuddered at his words. 200 survivors out of near 1 million from Abascan. The counter ticked down to 157. Pelican Tango 261 accelerated up and away from Abascan, leaving the Oni base, forests and jungles of Mu behind them. It was dusk. The sun was low in the crimson golden-laced sky. The bastion was visible in the darkness by the ambient light from the streetlights. Occasional blue flashes would be visible. Undoubtedly hostile armour bombing the place. What they were bombing, however, was a mystery. If what the pilot just said was true, there was no one living down there anymore. A flight of short-sword fighters rocketed past the Pelican down towards a bastion. They pulled out of their dive, levelled off briefly, and then pulled up and away just as fast. Moments later, fiery lines exploded across a bastion. The carpet bombing run was a success in that it managed to destroy the hostile armour, but also destroyed hostile infantry and more or less levelled a bastion. As the smoke cleared, it revealed a charred and burning strip of land. Marcos stood perfectly still and looked around the troop bay. Fireteam Ares had removed their helmets and were winding down after nearly 48 hours of straight combat, contemplating everything they had seen and done over the past 24 hours. Marcos kept his helmet on so he could look around at what he wanted and no one was any the wiser, and also so he could keep an eye on the EMP countdown. The evacuees were shaken. Most of them just stared off in the distance, unsure whether it would have been better to live with nothing left or die back on a planet with the ones they knew and loved. A few of them cried as they realised their friends, family, their home had gone. Marcos solemnly spared a lingering thought to all those who had died. Women and children, men and marines, people who had lives and jobs and families and loved ones, now no longer lived to enjoy those luxuries. Marcos shook his head and locked his thoughts away into a deep dark place in his mind and forgot about them and everything that happened in the past 48 hours. A large white flash bathed the area in harsh, temporary light, which only accentuated the damage to the region. Despite the damage, the planet was beautiful. Seas of blue, massive green landmasses covered in forests and jungles, fields, rolling hills and rugged mountains. The light subsided and took with it the lights of a bastion. Everything fell into darkness. Pelican 261 would reach orbit shortly. It would link back up with the frigate it came from and leave the system. Within the week, the Covenant would almost certainly orbitally bombard the planet with their plasma weapons until the beauty of Arcadia is nothing but a ball of glass, floating dead in space. Another world to add to an ever-growing list of human colonies destroyed during this war. More lives the Covenant had taken without remorse. A repeating pattern that no member of humanity wanted to see happen again, but knew that it most probably would. A pattern that Fireteam Ares were determined to stop.